initially introduced as the largest wild boar ever found in the United States, hunted by this young man there holding his pistol, which he used to hunt the animal. Very good publicity, first of all, but after a while it started to get a bit messy. First of all, it was started to be questioned, is this really a wild boar? And that's where I got introduced. I got the phone call saying, take a look at this. Is this a wild boar? And it doesn't really look like one. And with further investigation, its name was Fred, and it came from a neighbor's farm. Second question is, where's the kill shot? They're in the abdomen, and once discussion happened a bit more, it wasn't actually killed very quickly. It took about 3 hours. And so there were a few different concerns concerning this, and finally, the way it was portrayed, you're trying to figure out how big that boar actually is. Well, if you look at the perspective, he's actually acting like he's leaning on the boar, but he's actually standing about 10 feet back, to one of those tricks of photography. He reportedly weighed about 1,000 pounds, reported at 1,051 pounds to break some records. But the main question came out, and this is a couple of years later, is was mistreatment involved? Not only for the boy who did the shot, and it took 3 hours to bleed out, but is it allowable for a farmer to submit one of its livestock to this method of being killed? And actually a group of people were brought up on charges, but it was finally thrown out due to a number of different political reasons. The point I find time and time again is when it was a wild boar, there's one set of expectations for treatment and killing of that animal. When it's a domestic animal, when it's owned by a farmer, there's different expectations. So I want to take you through some of those expectations and decisions there. This is the way I introduce the subject of killing to my veterinary students. In animal agriculture, every natural death is a failure. Our aim is to kill our stock at an economically optimal point, or when failing that, the well-being of the animal cannot be sustained. That we do kill animals as part of animal agriculture, and the opposite is actually our problem when we don't kill them. Euthanasia, as part of that, is defined as meaning a good death. It occurs with minimal pain and distress. It's the act of inducing a humane death in an animal, and it's listed down below theoretically because euthanasia isn't an accepted part in human medicine. But in animals, it's an expectation, and we as producers and veterinarians are responsible for that area. When we have an animal, and that animal is compromised, we have 4 choices. One is to treat it. If an appropriate treatment is available, that's our responsibility, as long as it's practical and can be done with a relatively high expectation of success. It can be slaughtered. If it can be transported, if it's still in a condition to be transported and it's fit for human consumption, we put it on a truck. We sell it or transfer it. In the case of some disadvantaged pigs, they may do better in another production setting. It may be something like the smallest pigs going into a nursery. May either be euthanized or be put into another setting that, where there's less competition. And finally, there's euthanasia. Producers must decide to euthanize animals for humane, economic, and public health reasons. So there's a few reasons there. It's not only about the animal, it's for the sake of people, and it's for the sake of economics as well. Unfortunately, I had a phone call a couple days ago asking about killing pigs in Haiti. Worked some with Green Berets, of all people. Excellent students, in case you wonder. They do exactly what you say, yes sir, no sir. But they have this problem now with livestock in Haiti. And there are economic and public health reasons to take into concern when working with livestock under many conditions. What we've tried to do in PQA Plus is to try address euthanasia. Frankly, in our initial surveys, and we've been working with PQA Plus and its progenitors for close to 10 years now, euthanasia has always been a problem in our discussions. We need to have plans written by producers to say, what are you going to do taking into account human safety, pig well-being, practicality, having adequate technical skills, taking into account the cost, the aesthetics, the way it looks, and the limitations of each of the methods. There is no perfect euthanasia method. We're always going to be balancing different needs. But not only having the techniques in place are important, second of all, it's whether or not they're timely. That we have to have decisions in place to euthanize them when first there's no improvement or prospect of improvement after 2 days. We have timeliness that minimizes animal pain and distress. And finally, the equipment is available to do the job that we've been assigned to do. And as we choose the methods, we not only have to take into account that list, but in more detail, we have to be worried about safety. Perfect safety is an impossibility when you're trying to kill a 200-pound pig and you weigh 200 pounds. It's a physical impossibility to make it perfectly safe. But we have to take into account that we control the errors as much as possible. In many cases, there needs to be skill, there needs to be training to do the correct job. We have to worry about aesthetics. The sight of blood is often a concern for many people. And even after euthanizing, does the pig show any signs after being euthanized, after the brain stem is gone, or it has no sensitivity? Is it still moving? Is it still squealing? We in academia can say it's okay, that pig is actually insensitive, it cannot feel anything, but if the nerves keep on working and it shows that, it is distressing to a number of people on the farm. You may be on the opposite end. You may have grown up like I did, wanting to chop the head off a chicken and watch it run around the yard, especially on a snowy day. But in most cases, we have to have euthanasia methods that look calm and look well. In some cases, there are euthanasia methods that are one-step and two-step methods. In other words, is there a first step that you take to insensitize the animal and to make it stop feeling anything, and a second step to make sure it's dead? And I'm going to show you a couple of those, but they're more complicated. And is the equipment available, safe, and readily acceptable? There are booklets. We're updating these quite often. Another version is going to be recommended. Copies are on the back if you haven't seen them. I'll go through a few parts of the content, but it's a booklet created by the American Association of Swine Veterinarians and National Pork Board to give some guidelines. But I'll explain some of the challenges that we have. This is a calculation that we do quite often, trying to figure out what are the best methods and what do we do to control problems. A big reason for euthanasia is pain, painful situations. And when we look at controlling pain in a herd, we're trying to control three things. We're trying to control the incidence. How often does that painful condition occur? How often do sows get lame? Second of all, once they get a painful condition, once they become lame, what's the length of time that they continue to have that until that pain goes away? And finally, is there an intensity problem? Are some things more painful than others? We're getting into a lot of discussions on pain in areas such as castration, and that's coming down the pike as far as one of the subjects we're going to have to address in the future. But I wanted to point out where euthanasia fits in here. Definitely we have to prevent painful occurrences where they happen. But once they occur, we have a decision to limit the amount of time that that pig is subject to that painful condition, especially when it's a high-intensity condition. And you have a choice of using treatment methods, either addressing the root of the problem, in the case of, let's say, pneumonia, actually using antibiotics. In the case of pain, we can also address the pain by using analgesia, painkillers. Just as an aside, actually in the United States, of all areas in the world it seems, we've got the least amount of painkillers actually available for use in pigs. I think it's a real concern, and we have to work with our pharmaceutical companies to have some of the products available that are available in Canada, Mexico, Europe, and the like, especially some of the long-acting products. Because if we don't, if we can't control the pain, we really do have to consider euthanasia or shipping the pig off as one of our answers. The other concern with euthanasia are hidden cameras, hidden video cameras, and the like. And if you look at some of these videos that have come out over the last number of years, a major focus is compromised animals. As much as the criticism is on gestation stalls and the like, when they get on the farm, they're worried about the pig in pen number 3 in barn 7 that is down, and we have to agree, should have been euthanized. This is from a report to, I think, to Nebraska's Attorney General from a person that went onto a farm and identified pigs that should have been euthanized, or at least treated and had a plan. And unfortunately, procrastination occurred on this farm as it occurred on many others. The other part is the animal activist groups. This is from a cartoon book that was distributed in Minneapolis. Your daddy kills animals, ask your daddy why he's hooked on killing. That the way we do euthanasia can also be criticized as well. And some of the videos were not only of compromised animals, but animals taken out and euthanized in incorrect methods. And that makes really bad video as well. I think the first level always is of taking a look at euthanasia. Is it timely? Trained personnel always available, nights, weekends, holidays. Unless there are special circumstances, no more than 2 days of intensive care with no improvement or prospect of improvement should be needed before that decision is made. And prospect of improvement means you get an idea of what's going on inside the animal. If it's got a broken back, it's got a broken back. There isn't going to be a method of curing that animal. And unfortunately, sometimes we see very severe conditions being treated with penicillin, and that isn't going to be acceptable. The other part of euthanasia, and as we consider different methods, not only to be timely, the other part of euthanasia is not only having the correct instruments, but also making sure the animal is dead and knowing what the signals for death actually is. It's things such as no breathing, no heartbeat, no movement, muscle tone, no response to painful stimulus. You can prick the animal with a needle. No vocalization, no squealing. Probably the most common method is just touching the eyeball of the pig and seeing whether or not there's a reflex. That's what's normally done in most of our anesthetics levels. Because the point is, no euthanasia method is 100% effective. We have to test and make sure that what we've done actually works, because unfortunately, when that is not done, sometimes we end up with animals that show up at a later point in time as showing signs of life. In your booklet, you'll see a few major categories of technology. These are the major categories usually discussed of carbon dioxide, starting to get into other gases, especially some of the welding gases that have been used elsewhere, as far as far as euthanizing animals, using guns, using captive bolts, electrocution, anesthetic overdose, and blunt trauma. We're going to focus on the first four methodologies. Anesthetic overdose is using materials that are limited to veterinarians. We cannot give them as veterinarians to you working on the farm for administration, and therefore rarely enters the discussion. Blunt trauma has been used on pigs, is considered acceptable, but it just doesn't look good on videotape, and we in National Pork Board and other groups are looking at alternatives, and most larger producers and many producers have moved away from it, not because it doesn't work, but because the aesthetics are bad. Thumping, thwacking, whatever word you want to use for euthanizing a piglet, though it is efficacious, we've gotten in trouble over it, and it's less acceptable to many of the employees as well. We can break down into various reasons and for accepting and considering the various technologies, and again you can find a table such as this in the booklet at the back. But we have to take into account human safety, we have to take into account the pig welfare, how easy is it to be done, what is the cost, what does it look like, and what are the limitations. And I'll take you through a few examples. Probably the most common one being considered now, at least for bigger pigs, is the captive bolt. It's considered acceptable for a number of reasons. First of all, it is relatively inexpensive after the initial purchase. Second of all, it does not have some of the restrictions that live ammunition does. And third of all, it does not require licensure in many cases. As mentioned, human safety is there. The problems are twofold when we're looking at captive bolts. Exsanguination or pithing may be required. And the thing to explain about captive bolts, and others have explained it as well, is there's two types of captive bolts. There's penetrating and non-penetrating captive bolts. If you have an instrument that's older than 5 years, it's probably non-penetrating, which means it's designed to stun the animal, not to kill it. It actually is designed not to go through the skull. And that's problematic because in that case you need that secondary step to make sure it's dead. And it's the instrument they usually use in slaughterhouses, and they ensure death by exsanguinating, bleeding out the animal. And that's the suggestion there. You also need adequate restraint to the animal, and direct contact are often needed. So you have to hold down the animal. It's aesthetically displeasing. Some skill and training is needed, and one instrument does not fit all areas. As mentioned, we have the shorter instrument, which is the non-penetrating captive bolt, and we have the longer instrument, which is the penetrating captive bolt, which is what we recommend now because that penetrates into the brain, mushes it around enough, for lack of better terms, that the animal is dead. And that's what we need to see on the farm. The length of the bolt is very important, and in the booklet it discusses some of the lengths required. It also begs question, and we need guidelines on the ammunition to ensure that the bolt will penetrate and go through the skull, and therefore ammunition may differ by size of animal as well. There's different ways of creating it. Not only is there the pistol grip, there is this Magnum extended bolt as well. Again, a longer bolt for a one-step system that can be used, and it works quite well. The other part about a penetrating captive bolt is that it's very important to position it correctly. The normal directions are to create an X between the mid of the ear and the bottom of the eye and go right in the center there. If you go too low or too high, you're going to miss the brain, and again, you're going to stun the animal and not kill it. And that's the exhibit here of the two pens. This one was too low, missed this brain, and this one actually went into the brain. And just another example of the position and the angling that can be done. Humane destruction can also be done from the side. That's recommended for firearms. It's not a method to be used with the captive bolt unless you have a very long captive bolt. B is the recommended area for both the firearm and for the captive bolt pistol to gain that effect. Gunshot, we have a lot of discussion about that. It is inexpensive, it's immediate, does not require direct contact with the animal, and in fact, placing the gun too close to the head can be problematic. Disadvantages, there can be ricochet not only off the skull, but also off the surrounding area, especially if concrete is close by. Not surprising. We have to secure the firearm. It may be difficult to get it positioned correctly, especially a rifle. And again, there's concern about aesthetic problems, and some skill and training is required. And then, of course, we've got to explain to OSHA that we actually have firearms on the farm. And we're seeing less and less permits being available to do that. Those are the two main methods for larger pigs. Carbon dioxide is mostly for smaller pigs. It's relatively inexpensive, though the equipment initially can be problematic. In many cases, it's more aesthetically pleasing than blunt trauma, but there is those muscle spasms. After the pig is actually insensitive, not feeling anything, it will continue to move its legs for some times, and it's only practical for small pigs. We've worked with, for instance, carbon monoxide, which actually works better on small pigs, and we don't see that transient movement. The problem is OSHA won't allow us to use it. It's just too dangerous a gas. And just in case you don't know, modern car engines don't produce carbon monoxide at very high levels at all, and they don't work either. Many of you may be working with instruments such as this, where we use a chest. We have a tank of carbon monoxide. Some people are putting in argon into that mixture and seeing some less spasms. There's currently projects going on and looking at gas mixtures to make it calming. The challenge is to preload the container, put the piglets in there, and also have an instrument here that when we put carbon dioxide into the tank, that it's allowed to expand and it doesn't decrease the temperature in the container too much. There are directions on this. There's more and more people coming out with preset equipment, and it's working pretty well. There is frustration with it, however, though. It does suggest that you have a volume of pigs rather than one pig at a time to use it, and it sometimes results in procrastination. Second of all, there is that excitation, and to some it's unacceptable as well. There are also modifications such as a time-based system where the piglets are put in, CO2 is put in afterwards based on a sequence and finished at that point. Works about the same way. What we're working on now, or many are working on, is actually looking at instruments to euthanize small pigs. Penetrating captive bolts, stunning captive bolts, haven't worked in the past on small pigs. These are actually instruments that are designed to provide a wide area that presses against the skull, essentially is blunt trauma using the concrete in a more controlled method. And this uses ammunition, and we're finding more that there are methods out there of using essentially equipment similar to a nail gun, pneumatic methods that can be used to push out, as shown here, a wide disc that presses against the skull, and for small pigs below 15 pounds, 12 to 15 pounds, that will euthanize the pig as well. These are right now being evaluated. Unfortunately, we have a problem in that in the industry, when a video comes up and shows questionable euthanasia methods, the groups run to the American Veterinary Medical Association and ask, is this euthanasia method okay? And if it's a new method that they haven't seen, they waffle. And that doesn't help us in the public sphere. So what we're seeing more and more emphasis on, and National Pork Board, is evaluating these instruments as quickly as possible and putting out the information. And we'll see more and more of these show up because they're putting quite a bit in. Electrocution is one of those methods that's being investigated in more detail, and reality is there's very few methods out there, electrocution methods, that AVMA will consider acceptable. This is one from a slaughter plant that uses 2 leads, if I remember right, 360 volts. I forget all the other details. But there are these instruments out there that are acceptable, but are relatively, or not relatively, they are expensive and not really made for farm level work. But there are a few new ones coming out that are being evaluated to ensure that they work and they're not as elaborate as what they're using in the slaughter plants. The other side is plugging something into a 110 volt socket and putting 2 leads to the pigs. Just isn't acceptable for a number of reasons. It has a high failure rate, it has a high danger factor, and we've even used them inside veterinary schools in the past, and we just can't do that anymore. So again, sorry to say, wait and see, but new methods will be coming out that way. Just to get back to what we can do. This is an old research study that my graduate student did. And he just looked at the day of the week when pigs were euthanized. The green lines are the euthanasia rates by day of the week. The red lines are the sow and gilt mortality rates. And you see that the likelihood of being euthanized on a Tuesday is 4 times as high as being euthanized on a Sunday. And we do delay it. It's easy to do. It's difficult to stay on top of, but we've got to be a bit more consistent. I've had farm records where pigs are only euthanized on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we've got to be more contemporary in what we do and imagine that person with the video camera is watching what we do. Another area, and it is an economic question as well, we've looked at different cutoff weights, this into a wean to finished barn, and asked what's the likelihood that a piglet is going to die or be lightweight coming out of the nursery based on the entry that they came into the nursery. And we just find that the failure rates, either being a poor pig or dying, is very, very high once you get to a low weight coming into the nursery. And in fact, this is low exit weight, but the mortality rate in this case for a 7-pound pig coming into the into this wean to finish barn, we calculated out to be 85%. Most of it is mortality. Is that acceptable to put a pig in a situation where it's got an 85% chance of dying? And we do this but we've got to examine it, not only for humane reasons, but usually right along with humane reasons, there's economic reasons. Why waste your resources on a pig that's not going to thrive in the situations that you're going to place it in? And we're going to see more focus and more questions on euthanizing pigs on a preventive basis, taking into account what we call risk factors and saying these just don't fit the system and we can't provide the resources to the piglets that we should, and therefore it's either, I hate to say it, sell them to your neighbor or provide different situations on your own farm or euthanize them. So, leave you with a few questions, and these are the questions that we have. Is euthanasia a responsibility of the farm? Undoubtedly. And no one says this is not a responsibility that we have. Is euthanasia a responsibility of the employee? This gets more problematic. I grew up on a farrow-to-finish farm. My mom would not euthanize a pig. She did not even want to tell me which pigs to euthanize, but she was okay if I went in, killed those poor doing pigs, and took them out so she wouldn't see them. And we do have people like that on our farms. I think we have to work around that and recognize that there are different approaches to rearing pigs and different callings. I just respect the skills that they have. To force them to euthanize pigs is not the answer. But they have to be involved in that and accept the decisions and realize that someone is going to take that responsibility on the farm. How do we avoid procrastination? I've asked, do we do it in the morning or at night as far as doing the euthanasia? And the answer, I'm more comfortable if it's done in the morning, because sometimes the nighttime or the last thing of the day sometimes gets put off to the next day. And I don't think this is one of the areas we can afford to do. How do we protect employees? Where is aesthetics in there? And we have to provide methods that look good on film, but also, and that's going to be a challenge for the people.